This video looks at the best and quickest ways of learning 3D art in 2025. It also looks at whether it's worth learning given the recent changes to the industry and with the advancements of AI. I'll talk through the strategies of learning and whether university is worth it and whether there's any viable alternatives. And at the end, I'll tell you if and how I would learn 3D art now if I had my time again. So let's get started with, is it worth it? There's now lots of 3D model making AI programs appearing, and this might put people off thinking about 3D art as a career. These models are steadily improving and showing some results which I would say are getting a bit closer to being usable perhaps as non-important game assets, maybe low-level 3D printed objects, but in my opinion they still aren't quite there from what I've seen anyway. With most of these AI models, we see small jumps in development every few months which gets them a bit closer to being truly useful with each jump of improvement. The rate of improvement has definitely slowed down, and the biggest problem is always that last 20% it seems. So at the moment they manage to put together a model based on an image, but they always have some kind of problem area. At first glance they look good, but on a closer inspection they aren't quite usable because of the glitches you get. So AI still has, and I think will have for a while, this last 20% problem as I call it. It gets 80% of the way there, but it's struggling with that last bit of detail and accuracy. So in terms of topology, it always seems really dense or it's really rough and awkward. That is unless your object is something really generic, like a human person. With most AI I've seen, it takes a generic form and then builds on it. When the topology is really dense or it's awkward and not lined up, it's very difficult to make any edits. And of course, you need a good understanding of topology just to fix it. Then, like I say, there's the texturing. It's always a little rough and it's projected straight onto the surface from the original picture the model was made from. So you get lots of these errors which seem like they need a bit of texture painting to actually adjust and sort out. Then the rigging and animation problem. You can use generic animations. We've had that technology for a while, quite a few years in fact, in the form of programs like Mixamo. However, anything away from humanoids, so a character with a tail for example, becomes difficult, or animals that are slightly unusual. Like a T-Rex for example, it's kind of in between a quadruped and a humanoid, so how do you animate that with a generic template? And while some of these AI programs are saying that they can animate, it's just putting on generic animations which are humanoid or quadruped. Any actual AI animations I've seen have been really janky and awkward, and you'd need a lot of skill to tidy those up. So yes, there's been lots of advancements, but those advancements are slowing to some degree. And yes, you still need to learn to be a 3D artist to even use the new AI developments, and it seems like you will for a while now. And in fact, in the case of 3D models, let's say you're part of a small indie dev team, and you need some models for your game. Rather than using AI, you're better off buying an asset pack and maybe adapting the models if you need to. Or you could just make a model template of a character and reuse it, adapting it slightly each time for each different character. I would say we're still very much in a position where instead of taking the time to try and get AI to realize your ideas and then fix it, you're actually better off going down the route of making it yourself or getting an asset pack and adapting it. And like I say, I think this is going to be the case for a while because of that kind of last 20% rule. Getting AI to that last 20% of accuracy is proving very difficult. So again, 3D skills are very much needed today and they will be for a while. So even the most likely users of AI, let's take this small indie studio, they're still better off with an asset pack than they are the AI tools, and therefore will need the 3D artist to make those assets. Or you might be a junior level 3D artist on a game studio team, a small one, and you get the asset packs and you have to adapt them and adjust them. Those 3D skills are still very important and they will be for a few years to come. Even when AI does arrive and it's gotten much closer, we'll still need to be able to see whether it's working properly, be able to adapt it, at times tidy them up. So even at that point, we will need 3D artists and there is still a role in a career there. Let's quickly take a look at this model from Meshi, a popular 3D model making site. I typed in cyborg female with swords for hands, and it seems to be what it's doing is creating an image from my prompt and then the 3D model from the image. And at first glance, it actually looks like a reasonable model. But again, on close inspection, you can quickly tell it's a very generic base mesh that I could have downloaded, and the awkward, janky parts where the AI has tried to make a robotic-style head and hands with swords, which just don't work, they'll definitely need a fair bit of tidy up. The textures are fairly all over the place as well, and you'd need to texture paint in order to fix that. And we still got the problem that they've obviously put this on top of a generic female base character, so all these characters are going to look very similar. it would be better to download a base model of a female and adapt it yourself. It might take a little bit longer, but you'd come up with something that had much more character. So I would say comfortably that AI isn't here yet. That 20% is still proving very elusive. And even if it's 5 years away, you still need that knowledge to work with the models and make them suitable for use in your game projects if that's your goal. So yes, it's still worth it as a career, and there are still lots of opportunities. Not to say that AI hasn't affected some areas, it most certainly has. But 3D art is and will still be a viable and rewarding career, in my opinion, for many years. It is worth saying that we do, however, need to be smart about the direction we take. Specializing in one specific area could be problematic, especially if AI does suddenly take away that area or limit the jobs in that area. So having a broad and general understanding would be more suitable in my mind, because I think you'll need to be more adaptable in the future. So in terms of a career and what direction I'd be looking in, I'd be going for a more generalist. And ideally, I think I'd be going for smaller studios or freelancing than going for a bigger studio, because they tend to want specialists in particular areas. So now that it looks to be that there might still be a career, how do we learn 3D art in 2025 in the most efficient way possible? Well, I believe there are 4 possible directions. Each has advantages and disadvantages, and it depends a bit on whether you're time rich or money rich, if that makes sense. So quite commonly when you're younger, maybe you're a student, you're time rich but money poor. So everything needs to be really cheap, but you've got loads of time to dedicate to things. Alternatively, there's money rich, if we can call it that these days, and time poor. So you're working, you're gaining money, but you've got much less time to spend on developing your career. So for the time rich and money poor, YouTube videos will certainly be very effective. They don't really cost anything. Maybe you have to see an advert before they start, but they're great for those that are motivated. Almost everything you need to know is on YouTube. However, the learning pathway can be really bad because they'll jump all over the place. You might miss some fundamentals, and teaching varies a lot. There's no obvious distinction between a beginner and advanced video. There are some fantastic channels and you can learn almost anything you need to know, but it takes much longer to get good because you end up jumping around from video to video an awful lot. One step above this is you've got slightly less time, but a little bit of money. Then you want to go for a paid-for course. This is certainly one of my preferred choices. Check out the link in the description for my own courses. There's lots of low-cost courses out there. They're usually more methodical. They usually got a bit of support. Again, you have to be self-motivated, but the learning journey is usually much easier and it builds up based on what you've learned previously, if the course is done properly anyway. The bad side, of course, is if you struggle with motivation, it's often difficult as it's all down to you. There's no assignments or deadlines or detailed feedback mechanisms. There's also no obvious class or cohort that you can team up with, chat with, create connections and collaborate with, which you would get at something like university. The courses you buy online in 3D art can often also lack artistic teaching and focus more on the technical skills. It's good that you can cater your learning by choosing lots of different courses, but you might miss important aspects that aren't as sexy. For example, you don't see many courses on good topology and becoming an unwrapping master. And there is a tendency for students to pick the courses based on the thumbnail alone, with the "I want to make that" attitude. I'm not saying that's wrong, but you might focus on certain things and not other important aspects as much. The other very slight problem with courses is that many people just copy the outcomes. So they go through the course making the same thing, the exact same thing as the instructor. And what they should be doing is making the content their own. So if you are going down the course route, then make sure you don't fall into those traps. Always try and go beyond the course by taking what you've learned and apply it with similar projects, but they're your own projects. So that's the low-cost online course, a great option. Then there's the big university course, which is kind of for the time-rich and money-rich these days. Now, university courses can be really great and most of the time offer a well-rounded, detailed understanding of whichever path you choose to go down, catering well towards the industry, usually taught by industry professionals. Sometimes they have links with big companies. They do usually focus on artistic skills and slightly less on the technical skills, in fact. And I've known it be the case that lots of people have to take an extra course whilst going to university to pick up on those technical skills. The downside to university, of course, is they are very long. They're 3 to 4 years, very expensive, dependent on the country you're in. The quality can actually vary a lot depending on the institution. If you have a lot of time and your location offers free university places or low-cost university places, then I would say that's definitely a good choice. It's also great if you have a dream of working for a big studio or well-known company. It's not absolutely essential, and there are many artists who haven't gone to university but do work for a big well-known company, but I would say that's very rare these days. Most big companies and big studios demand industry experience, even at the lowest end of the ladder, being junior artists. These days, it would be very tough to get into these bigger companies as a self-taught artist with little experience. So for the big company dream, university is probably the best choice still. Because of the often very high costs and the time investment, it's actually last on my list of recommendations these days. Unless, of course, it's free or low cost in your location, then brilliant stuff. For those that have high cost universities, I'd rather be spending that money on courses and equipment. But that takes a lot of self discipline and motivation, of course. So, how would I go about learning 3D art if I had my time again and I was just starting out? Well, if I lived somewhere that offered free university places or low cost, then I'd probably be doing that. Otherwise, I'd be going down the self-taught route. So for more context, I've not got a degree in art. I've got a degree in media studies. My artistic career, or that side of things, is all self-taught with courses and as much free content as I could get my hands on. 20 years ago this was, so there wasn't an awful lot. But I've managed to make it work. I get offered work regularly from small game studios and even some bigger ones. I've had lots of different roles and done lots of work, not only as a game artist, but lots of different areas of 3D, architecture, 3D printing, training videos, shorts, and all sorts. So my knowledge from the self-taught route has and is serving me very well. And yes, even with AI, I still get lots of job offers and opportunities. And the self-taught route is actually much easier today than it was back then. There's so much more free content available and much better course quality. So again, I'd probably be choosing the route of buying courses and then supplementing it by free content. But there is actually one thing I might do differently if I had my time again, and it's also something which I think there's a bit of a shortage of, and something I'm exploring offering as a teaching option myself. So it's my thinking more recently that if I was just starting out, I would try and join a program which lasts a few weeks. Something that has assignments and deadlines, so I have some motivation and structure. Something that's perhaps a little bit more detailed than a course in a sense of perhaps lots of courses together, making sure I'm learning things in the correct order and not jumping ahead, and even has a class and cohort for the connections and collaboration so there are other people learning at the same time, doing the same thing that I'm doing. Ideally, this program would offer extra professional support and offer an industry professional tutor with teaching experience for feedback and guidance. That, I think, is actually the ideal because it's a bit in between a paid-for course and has some of those advantages of a university place. From what I've seen, the prices can be a little bit expensive. Obviously, there's overheads and running costs, but nowhere near the kind of degree level costs. I think also there's big advantages to it being much shorter, not 3 years, but 6 to 8 weeks long instead, because that gives you a good base to then move on to your own things. I think that sort of time length of a crash course like that is just right for then moving on and you can start using the free resources or other very specific courses. So my idea would be going from a course like that onto other smaller, more advanced courses. So finding a good program like that, I think, is possibly the most efficient way of learning. It's more cost effective, but still having some of the elements of a degree course, albeit in a much smaller form. So that's why it's something that I'm trying to set up at the moment with Game Dev TV. Take a look at the link in the description if that sounds interesting to you. I am really starting to think that's the ideal pathway. After one of these programs, you'd have the understanding that you can develop from, or perhaps you'd find your first position in a small studio or something like that. And I think that's how I would approach it if I was starting out afresh, with the idea of getting a good grounding that I could build upon for the rest of my career. Of course, it's important to say that all these approaches are valid, and it's different from person to person, depending on your motivation, time constraints, money constraints, and so on. The important thing is to be consistent. Keep putting in the hours, and you will get better, and the opportunities are more likely to come your way. So that's my current thoughts on learning Blender in 2025, and I do think it's worth it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.